Hey, Pastor Matt here once again with Ask TBC, moving through beautiful design. It feels to me rather quickly. And so we just wrapped up the portion of this series on manhood. And so let me answer a few of the questions that we got this week coming out of closing out manhood and then now moving on next to really womanhood. And so with that, let me answer a couple of these questions. The first one we got in, quite a few hits on this one, were what are some questions to ask to go after a man's heart? And so really, whenever I get asked these type of questions, I find them to be somewhat difficult because I think you would go at different men's hearts differently. And so the thing that I think my wife Lauren does so well is she'll ask me how I feel about a certain scenario or situation. And so Lauren sees my calendar on my schedule. So when I get home, she doesn't ask me, how was your day? But rather she'll ask me, hey, how was your meeting with Josh Patterson? Or how was your lunch with Afshin Ziafat? Or and then I can begin to unpack my day for her in a way that has details rather than the normal male good. And so in that conversation, Lauren will often ask me how I felt about that, or did that frustrate me, or was I encouraged by that? And that helps me actually flesh out how I was feeling about it, or why I did get frustrated. And then once I can start answering the question about how it did frustrate me, we can dig around in the why that was frustrating for me. And now we're having a heart level conversation that goes beyond me just going good. I think another thing that Lauren does often and does well is ask me really where I am in my relationship with the Lord. Like, do I feel really connected? Do I feel like the fuel that I'm burning is fuel that is rooted in my relationship with the Lord, or rather, am I just kind of moving on my own strength in this season? And so she'll ask that question really well. And so hopefully that gives you some idea on how to pursue the heart of your man or your husband. Another question I got asked, and this is a funny one, and honestly the easiest that I have to answer today, is, hey, love the beautiful design series, but we're all wondering who wins one-on-one in a basketball game, Bad News Bo or Matt. So quickly, and this is a no-brainer, I would, and the reason I'm saying that is because Bo no longer has any cartilage in his knees. And so if Bo still had his knees, I think he would destroy me. He actually played college ball, but since his knees don't work, I like my chances. It probably would still be close, but I like my chances. Okay, a couple more here. Adam didn't exercise headship over Eve in the fall account. Does this mean that the design of God was broken prior to sin entering the world? No. It was actually Adam's refusal to lead, love, and serve that was the sin that brought destruction into the cosmos. This is why God continually says it was Adam's sin that broke the beautiful design. It wasn't Eve's, it was Adam's. And so Eve certainly sinned, but Adam's sin was the one that got repeatedly. We'll see it in the New Testament, and we'll see it in the Old Testament, where it's actually Adam that brought about sin into God's shalom-given, God-wrought cosmos. Okay? Now, let me do two more, and I think these are easier questions. So another one was, how do we fulfill our design without idolizing the idea of fulfilling a gender role? So in this one in particular, being a man to just be a man, but rather to seek to become a man in order to glorify God. Well, I think really the driver here is that we want to line ourselves up with how God designed us to work. So the goal is to be obedient to the Lord, not fulfill some sort of gender-specific idea, but really just to be obedient to the Lord. And so the reason we don't kind of exalt or idolize the idea of manhood is really what we're after is pleasing the heart of the Lord as He has commanded us and designed us to work. I also think it's helpful, and I said this past weekend, that what God has tasked the man with is really impossible, and therefore seeking to become the type of man that God has called you to be will be wrought with imperfection, failure, and a constant need for grace. And I think that in and of itself is going to create humility and a desperation on the Lord that won't turn us into legalists, but rather turn us into those who are desperate desperate for God to work in and work on and work through. And so it creates an abject humility when we see ourselves falling short over and over and over again. Now, the last question, and I got this question a ton from young women, in particular young single women, who ask the question, what do you mean? You've said it repeatedly now. What do you mean when you say that we should raise the bar of our expectations based on what you've been teaching on manhood? So repeatedly, I said the reason women should dial in when we're talking about manhood is that you'll play two roles in the life of a covenant community when it comes to men being men. The first is to expect men to be this, to expect men to be what God has called them to be. And so it's in that space that I've tried to say, listen, don't have a low bar for men, have a high bar for men. And so what I mean by this, young single women or just single women, is that you should have an expectation that as men pursue you, as men have conversations with you, and as men are around you, that you should hold them to the high standard of biblical manhood, which means they should walk in godliness. They should seek to serve, protect, love, honor you in every way possible. And so where a man falls short of that, I think you shouldn't give into kind of the modern cultural notion of loneliness, or, he's not perfect, but he's moving that way. But you should just have a high standard for what it looks like for a man to pursue you and for a man to be around you. Like, don't let a man flirt with you who hasn't let his intentions be known. I think one of the things I've seen here at the Village is really a beautiful thing is a single woman calling out a single man for being so flirty around her without really pursuing her in any way that was legitimate. And so that's what I mean by raising the bar, to have a higher expectation for how men approach you and treat you as you encourage and expect them to fulfill what God has called them to be as biblical men. So that's all the time we have for this one. God bless. Celebration weekend this weekend, and then we'll be right back digging into the text that before sin entered the world, the Bible says that it's not good for man to be alone. So what does it mean? Is the man incomplete? Is he complete? What do we do with that singular sentence? And so we'll do that as a transition week into womanhood. God bless you. Hope you're enjoying the series. We'll see you next weekend.